last month in May was Mental Health Awareness Month. I only found it fitting that I got a guest by the name of Dr. Jordan Rivera. He is a psychiatrist in the San Diego area. And I got to tell you, this episode was one of the more informative and I think necessary conversations that we need to address. We touched on a lot of the stigma regarding mental health in various cultures and cultural backgrounds. I couldn't have been more honored to have Jordan as a guest, and I look forward to actually not only listening back to this podcast because I felt like I actually learned a lot, but also to have him back on. We'd already discussed having a part 2 in which we're going to tackle a lot more that we couldn't get to in this episode. So without further ado, welcome to episode 4, The World You're Not In, featuring Dr. Jordan Rivera. Okay, so welcome. So how do you like to be addressed? Dr. Jordan Rivera? Jordan? What is this? How do you want it?
You can call me Jordan.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm a doctor. I'm a psychiatrist. So Dr. Rivera, I'm also known as that, or Dr. Jordan.
Cool. So, excuse me. All right. Thanks for coming. Diego actually told me about you. He said you guys used to work together.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So for anybody listening, Diego's back, by the way.
just for today's episode. Just for today's episode.
No,
yeah.
Diego spoke highly of you. He actually was the one that we were, I think, post-rehearsal talking about different people that I wanted to have on. We decided, me and Oliver's not here today, obviously, but we decided to kind of take this podcast in a bit of a different direction. And he mentioned you as being someone that's, he's had very interesting discussions with and piqued my interest. And so I wrote some things down. I sent them your way just so you could kind of get the ball rolling. But yeah, first and foremost, I just kind of wanted to know a little bit about you, and you could also tell everybody a little bit more about yourself. What got you into psychiatry? Excuse me. Was there like a pivotal moment that you're like, oh, this is what I want to do? Or is it just from the get-go, you're like...
Yeah, no, thank you. I love the opportunity to be here and just be able to kind of share a bit about me in this field and just kind of my passion for mental health. And I met Diego through my most recent job, Family Health Centers of San Diego. So I wanted to be a doctor from an early age. I thought, and when I thought about doctor, I thought more so like a healer. I didn't necessarily see the white coat as like a way of healing, but grew up kind of in a religious background and understood more so that like healing can happen on kind of different levels. So the idea of just like helping people to feel better was kind of ingrained from an early age. I ended up getting into medical school, and I had experienced, surprisingly, there was a lot of suicides. And I had no idea prior to.
In medical school?
In medical school, yeah.
So these med students, there's a high suicide rate?
Yeah, there was a high suicide rate. And unfortunately, I think the statistic at the time was that every year, 400 physicians take their lives, whether that be trainees or actual attendings out in the community. That's, my class was of 200 people. So 2 classes worth of people die, and we have like a shortage of doctors. So that kind of piqued my interest of like, what's going on? I come from Spring Valley myself here, very low income environment, and just had a dream of wanting to do this, become this doctor. And so I see these people that might have not come from the same environments, but they were taking their lives. And I thought that was just really interesting. And then at one point, my dean had a substance abuse problem that became very publicized throughout Los Angeles, through the Los Angeles Times. It was like a breaking story.
Wow.
And I had such a curiosity about like what's not being discussed, like what's not being talked about here.
What substance? I mean, if it was in the LA Times, I'm assuming it was made public.
Like Molly, I mean,
The dean
was throwing parties in the in his office after hours.
With love campus.
A variety of entertainers that he wanted to entertain, and then also taking videos of things. And he was known to be quite a drinker. I would sit at tables with him at scholarship events, and I would, know he was a little bit faded, but I didn't understand like the level of the substance use. And so that really like got me interested more so in mental health and what's happening with people are like in these spaces you would think are supposed to be thriving or giving this performance, the performativity of thriving, and actually like we're unwell, right? We're not doing too well. I actually ended up going into family medicine. Thought that would I'd be able to do mental health work in that sense there. I heard it, being a general practitioner, you get a lot of mental health, but you don't really get the time to discuss with people about their mental health. And so in my first year of residency, in family medicine, I had two people come in on the same day, two patients thought they were having heart attacks. And it turned out to be, for both of them, anniversaries of people passing. And it was men. And so they presented with these physical symptoms and not necessarily like the emotional component. Then we got to the emotional component. And for me, that was like, okay, I think rather than learning about like how to treat pneumonia again and again in different ways, like these guys are coming in here thinking that they're having heart attacks, and actually they're, their emotional pain is manifesting in a particular way. That's interesting. So I just kind of had the courage to jump ship and go to psychiatry. Unfortunately, was able to stay in Los Angeles and get trained at a phenomenal program, the UCLA VA program. So I learned a lot about substance abuse and PTSD, got psychotherapy training, and just killed it. I mean, it was so much fun and just so insightful and inspiring. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into mental health, and I've just had a large passion for it since then.
Wow. You mentioned actually two things. I wanted to touch on the suicide thing because I definitely wasn't aware of that. But before I forget, these two men that you spoke of that thought they were having heart attacks, were they unaware that it was the anniversary? And it's almost like just like subconsciously they're just feeling it? They're just completely unaware?
I think sometimes people can come through to situations in an unconscious way.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they want to talk about it, but they don't necessarily have a language or ability. And so it's representing itself in the sense of pain.
Right.
And they needed someone to ask them, what else might be going on right now?
Right.
Oh, by the way, my dad died today, a year ago. I was like, okay, that's something to know, right? That's something to think about. May that be playing a role here, especially when the EKGs come back normal, right? So the EKGs come back normal and they're not having a heart attack. Then we were like, hey, twice now, people are coming in. This is actually really normal EKG. But you did mention this.
So they had normal EKGs, and they're just essentially having a panic attack.
Yes. So essentially people were having like panic attacks. And I just thought it was so interesting to see, like to witness it, to understand that people need support in different ways. A lot of primary care was also mental health too. How people take care of their bodies is based on how they think about things, how they feel about themselves, which ultimately lead to the expression of behaviors. If you don't like yourself very much, it seems kind of odd that you would be taking care of yourself in healthy ways, right? You would more so reflect not taking care of yourself. So part of it is also just kind of like building an insight with people that I really enjoy around like the favorite version of themselves that they're trying to be and like what that would look like to get there.
And it seems like that the way people tend to get connected to mental health, right? I mean, not only from our professional experience, but just in general, is it seems to start with primary care, right? It almost seems like, okay, they come to you and then the primary care is who's making the referral at that point, right? To mental health. Would you say that that's the case?
Yeah, oftentimes it's, not that they are coming to a psychiatrist, but they're coming to us through a referral from whether it's a therapist or whether it's primary care themselves, where the primary care might have already tried to start some type of intervention and might need a little bit more assistance. They don't necessarily know what to do or how to look at this from a different dimension that could, ultimately be a better intervention. So that's when they send it to us.
And so for, the listeners that, aren't necessarily aware exactly of what psychiatry is, can you give us a explanation of what psychiatry is?
Ooh, that's such an interesting question to think about, what psychiatry is. I mean, I think psychiatry is it's still a growing, and just like every field of medicine, right? There's never, knowledge isn't not building on itself, right? But it's a growing field of medicine where we are understanding that our moods, or otherwise states of being, attitudes toward life, are also kind of reinforced through our attention, through our perception. Sometimes to the point where particular ways of thinking can get distorted. And in those distortions, while they get habituated, can cause us a lot of suffering, right? And so sometimes that suffering can be ameliorated, not necessarily like cured, but ameliorated with medications to provide a sense of soothing. Is that, are we eradicating sadness through psychiatry, medications, through psychotropics? Are we eradicating fear? No, like that's not what, we're not meant to do that. But what we can do is help people to feel some sense of soothing while they're able to then show up for themselves and develop other ways of thinking that might better support the life that they want. And they need support on the way to do that at times too. And that's kind of hard when there's also bipolar disorder and, psychosis and things that people might not necessarily understand quite deeply about what's going on.
There's a lot of overlap between the fields of psychology and psychiatry. Why did you choose the latter? Why did you choose psychiatry?
Good question. I think I was already tied to medicine. I liked the idea of, the healer aspect for me was also, being able to make a balm and put that on like a wound. So I think the medicine aspect is still important, and it's just great information to know. Mm-hmm. And then simultaneously, it doesn't make up for using thought with precision, right? Thinking with more precision. When we have these disorders like depressive disorder or anxiety-related disorders, they're cognitive disorders. It's the manner by which we think about things that is disordered, right? And it's disordered because it's affecting our lives that are causing us suffering. That's where disorder comes from. It's not just, oh, I'm not thinking correctly. It's I'm suffering through my own thinking and I don't know how to get out of it. And so I think the psychological aspect is helping people to resonate with other manners of thinking that actually might support the life that they're trying to live. So you kind of need a balance of both, because if you can't get out of bed, you're not going to be able to do that work.
Right.
So the medication can also be supportive in a sense, to help people, feel a little bit of energy, to get out of bed, to feel a little bit of soothing, to have some type of resiliency towards the intensity of what they're experiencing.
So let's continue down that a little bit with people with depression or anxiety disorders. How often in your case have you seen them able to, in conjunction with medication and therapy sessions, how often do you see these people actually wean off medication?
All the time.
All the time.
I think it's something that we need to talk about more so, because I like to make an effort, at least in my practice or how I practice with patients, about de-prescribing, right? Like I like to mention to them again and again, that we are not eradicating fear. Mm-hmm. It's not something to be eradicated. Sadness is not something to be eradicated.
I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to bring that up too. Continue, sorry.
Right? So it's more so about how are we associating and relating to that fear that is arising inside of us, and what is it letting us know? So I think emotions can be understood more as like a guide or compass, not to be numbed, not to be unlistened to, right, or reactive to all the time, but more so like we can develop a sense of mindfulness around them. And so I see people actually get better quite often when we talk about, hey, we don't actually have to be on this medication forever. It does take, the length of time it's going to take while we're on them, but it's not necessarily about trying every single type of medicine under the belt here, right? Unless it's really causing you side effects that you can't tolerate. But more so, are we showing up and doing the work of feeling better on purpose? Like, are we learning how to deliberately bring peace into our lives, right? And the medicine's there to just support. But people get better all the time. I almost think that we should understand depression as something that's human nature. It's things that people go through when we don't know how to cope with, uncertainty in our lives. We're all going to face that at times, dark nights of the soul in a sense. But it's there to also teach us the skills that we might necessarily need to continue to move and thrive in life, not necessarily remain in a stuck place forever. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. No. And I also can appreciate what you just said. I think there's a lot of stigma around medication, right? So when I would work with Jordan in the clinic, I was responsible for what's called warm handoffs, right? So if primary care or someone is speaking to a patient and they want to offer to connect them to mental health services, and they would offer to have me come in so I could speak to the patient, and a lot of times I would even witness the stigma around medication, right? I think, and I'm curious to see where that really comes from. That's probably a conversation for another day, but I would find that a lot of people put off, the medicine that could really help them, because there's a lot of stigma and because there's this idea that once you're on them forever. So I think addressing the stigma and you mentioning that, I think addresses it actually very powerfully. But I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of the initial, when they come to you initially, right? The being scared to take the medicine, right? I'm sure you've seen that plenty of times. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I get a lot of people that come in for their initial evaluations. And I definitely ask them what their, kind of like what their relationship to the idea of taking medications is, just to kind of get an idea. Some people have tried so many medications. They've tried plenty of medications in the past and they say they don't work. So I can understand why they don't want to feel like a guinea pig anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And simultaneously, there's some people who are just not really coping well. They don't have coping skills to regulate their emotions. If you get upset and you're throwing mugs or you're punching people and you don't know how to control that, medication might be something we need to talk a little bit more about right now, right? We need a little bit of separation from the severity of whatever you're experiencing or perceiving is going on when someone says something, right? We need a little bit of emotional boundaries, becoming unbothered and developing that sense. And so sometimes I I do think medications can be helpful. People are often really nervous about side effects of medications, and that's completely understandable because they're not magic cures. Whatever you put into your body, you risk also having a side effect from that. You risk developing tolerance to certain things. And so having these kind of discussions about just being honest about what we're doing here, I think is quite important so that people are, whether they want to buy in or not, they can. But I also let people know, like, hey, use the breadth of human experience. Like psychiatry and psychology are one aspect of a way to pursue healing and to pursue feeling like you're whole, which you already are, but we're trying to get you to feel that. So if it's not this, then like don't stop with these things. Like go to philosophy, go, look at stoicism, go try and practice yoga or somatic work. But healing doesn't necessarily have to only come from this medical, a Western medical way of from this approach.
Right. It doesn't have to be one dimensional.
Exactly. Use all of it. Use all of it to help yourself because you deserve it.
Is that something you are seeing more psychiatrists this day and age maybe recommending?
Yeah, I was fortunate to actually be trained with one of the psychiatrists that wrote the book on kind of like lifestyle psychiatry. So talking about just like how much our lifestyle plays a role in our mood, our mental well-being, and how we can do a better job of really like metacognition, like thinking about thinking, right? Thinking about your own thinking and what kind of thoughts you're permitting, believing in. And if you do that more so, that's basically a sense of mindfulness there. So people can generate or create, be more conscious about the life they're creating through thinking about thinking more so, not necessarily waiting to use medications and then go to therapy and unlearn the way that they're thinking, that's telling them that to believe that they're a loser, right? It's like, well, we don't want to like indulge believing we're a loser. That's what we're trying to stop. But people can habituate and almost feel like they have to go down this direction. So I really like the holistic ways of looking at things too, so that people can kind of just get into different releases of tension throughout their body, throughout their thinking. It builds their confidence when you're doing, physical activity, etc. That's good for you.
Well, I was gonna mention, I think what I would like to ask is, I think, we kind of briefly touched on depression, right? And now that you're mentioning the whole lifestyle psychiatry thing, what would you say through your training, right? As a psychiatrist, what would you say then that it means to be mentally well versus mentally ill?
Ooh, I love this. I think this is like such a great question because so much of our profession, we have the DSM and it focuses on pathology.
What is the DSM? So that way our listeners know.
The Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which basically is kind of like this collection of pathological behaviors, in a sense, that when you have enough of them or you meet a certain amount of them in criteria, it means that you kind of have this disorder, or we think that you might be having this disorder. So it's used to kind of help, it's really used to help people understand or label kind of the in one phrase or one diagnosis, like the expression of the symptoms that they're experiencing. Sorry, the question was.
Is to get back to it, is that what is the the difference between what it means to be mentally well versus what is meant versus mentally ill? Because I think that we all have this idea of what mental illness is, right? Yeah. And for a long time, that was the focus of psychology and psychiatry, right? Would you say that was the case? Versus, okay, if we know if we're trying to figure out what abnormal means, right? What distress means, what dysfunction means. Well, what does it mean to be functional? What does it mean to not be in distress? What is it that the people who will never walk into your office, right? What is it that they have, right? That allows them to get through life and live the life. I think one of the phrases that you would always say to me when we would be doing our clinical consultations, right, regarding the patients that we worked on together, would be, how to get them to live life by design, right?
Yes.
So that's the real question. That's the quick question. But sorry, I felt like I had to ask what the definition of the DSM was, because a lot of people just don't know. They're not familiar with this practice.
Yeah,
right?
no.
There's still very much the stigma, So
Absolutely.
But what would you say? Then what would you say it is mental wellness versus mental illness?
Yeah. So I think, and this could be just more of my own definition of what mental wellness is, but I think it's a lot of emotional regulation, right? Being able to kind of have more so of a mastery of minding your mind, understanding your mind as a tool, just as much as you would understand that your hands are tools, or just as you would understand that your hearing is, a tool for you. So more so, it's being able to developing a sense of confidence in your mind and its ability to bring about the fulfillment of what you want for your life, right? So life by design in that sense. Oftentimes we're feeling that life is kind of happening at us, right? I'm going some circumstance after circumstance after circumstance, taxes, this, that. The news flashes, that's every year, right? That there's always going to be circumstance. But as we start to, mental wellness is, do I have a security in my beingness that when circumstance arises, I will show up to it in particularly consistent ways, right? And maybe when certain negative emotions, or quote unquote negative, but when certain emotions arise, do I respond through the sense of my favorite version of myself, not in the ways I've responded before, right? Oh, well, they deserve to be punched. Might have been how you thought so in the past, but are you trying to be that now, And if you're not, you're going to feel dysregulated because you're not acting as how you desire to show up, right? That's where the oscillation, the emotional instability comes from. The groundedness comes from being rooted in being who you want to be, authentically so. And so wellness, I think, is merging the vulnerable parts of yourself, understanding the defenses, and then also kind of being mindful of, okay, now I know this stuff about myself. How do I keep aligning it to living my favorite version of myself, which ultimately gives me the greatest life that I could live, right? I think that's wellness. And it takes, it takes wisdom. It takes time. It takes understanding yourself more deeply on purpose.
It sounds like it's a skill. It's a practice.
Yeah, I think it's wise to be wise, right? And wisdom is a skill. Absolutely. And peace is a skill.
Right.
I think people sometimes think that they should just be happy or just be peaceful or contented or joyful without really understanding what those things are and how they're cultivated. And so wellness is prioritizing knowing that you want to bring about peace, that you want to bring about contentedness, that you want to bring about mindfulness or wisdom, and being that person, essentially. And that actually is like a much more lovely life than constantly reacting and feeling defensive and egoic and, that everything's happening against you.
You touched on, and you actually kind of just mentioned it right now about everything happening against you. Do you find that most people, or at least maybe most of your patients, kind of have that mindset that life is happening to them?
I do. It's kind of nuanced as well because we live within systems that, we didn't build per se. I was born into, a colonialist racist system that I had to learn more so about. It's not my fault that it happens, but it's kind of like the conditions. Mm-hmm. My worth doesn't come from those conditions though, right? The worth doesn't come from the conditions. So helping people to build an insight around separating themselves from these other concepts is part of the job as well, right? At least for me, where life is happening to them a lot of the times because of the really enmeshment to the conditions, where their worth and self-esteem is tied, the credit score, the not going to college, I'm such and such age and I have nothing to show for it.
What my parents want from me.
What my parents want from me, right? It's all really recurrent, common patterns thinking that kind of was not conceived by us. It's coming from, the society itself. So part of it is kind of helping people to realize that life is kind of happening through them. They are life itself, right? We're all kind of life itself. And so what did you want the story to be? And helping, that's what I really enjoy, the idea of like life by design, like narration, who's talking, who's telling this story, right? And helping people to continue to build that insight. So they move from a sense of it's happening to them and they see, okay, maybe these conditions, I've been keeping them around, or there's a reason why I'm still in this situation. And they will rearrange as I change my sense of self and be and act in a different way, if that makes any sense.
Is that, I don't know if you're allowed to actually answer this. Is that how your sessions start, more or less? So what I mean by that is when you conduct your sessions, is it instant, like I need to diagnose this person and then figure out the medication? Or is it more of a holistic approach where you're going to get a little bit of background, you're going to find out, well, why do they view the world like this, so on and so forth? Is this like a coping mechanism? Is this a defensive thing that they've developed over the years?
Yeah. I think I like to understand kind of their mental health history in terms of the system that they've been in. So just understanding the meds that they've taken in the past, if they've ever taken any, or if they're naive to those, other health conditions that might be going on that could also mimic low mood, right? Like hypothyroidism, if they're feeling, if they're hypothyroid and it's untreated, you don't necessarily need to put them on Zoloft. They need to be on like the appropriate medications. And also if other conditions are like untreated, like if they have unmanaged diabetes, high blood pressure, you're going to feel really tense, right? If your blood pressure is not managed.
Sleep apnea.
If you're not sleeping, then, your mood is always pretty much always going to be unstable if you're not getting like the actual intervention for that. But what I love to do, and one of my instructors taught me this in training and I loved it. We always start with a developmental history. So I like to talk to patients and say, ultimately, whatever you're going through right now and how it's being handled makes sense in the context of your life, okay? And what's gone on and what you've learned or not learned, et cetera, et cetera. So let's start from the beginning and we do a developmental history. So go through, was a cord wrapped around your neck when you were born? Like, right. Can you tell me that? Like, let's start from like the earliest things. Parents, were there two parents in the household? What was that, the relationship and associations like, siblings, all of it? I just want to know who this person is that I'm talking to, what they've gone through, because oftentimes you'll find out people have lived a journey already, and sometimes through that journey, they've received lint and a paper clip's worth of ability to emotionally regulate. Like their family was never going to teach them how to do that, right? So it's helpful to understand why they might be behaving in the ways that they are, and that it can be letting them know, this can be changed. It's just not something that we learned, right? It's not something that we learned, but actually it's something that we can learn, and there's ways to do it, and it's structured. And then you'll feel better too by being able to move in this way. But it's not your fault that you didn't learn it, So I kind of like to go through that because meds are easy. You can go up and down, stop or start them. Right. But you're not eradicating sadness with that. People want to be able to use their minds in ways that they didn't know that they could. And I think that's more powerful than the meds per se. But I do, think meds are helpful. I'm not trying to say they're not.
No.
And you essentially just mentioned that, like touching on the childhood trauma, right? And how that can shape us even as adults.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of a lot of that trauma too, I like to think about children as kind of like open doors where every experience is new. And so we're just kind of permitting most experiences. And then we might even permit experiences that actually were terrible and scary And so it's kind of like a flash shot when it comes to trauma, where we would never want this to happen again. This is something we felt so unsafe around. And so if there's instances now that actually remind us or even resemble that moment that we felt like we couldn't handle, right? We couldn't cope with. That's where we start to experience a lot of like the dysregulation and the trigger, the triggers go off, the dysregulation, we're now irritable, et cetera, et cetera. But unconsciously so, right? We don't know what's going on, why this happened. So I always think it's really interesting too, that, not all PTSD is like a car accident or like combat, but people grew up in households where they were gaslit and there's a lot of violence and things were happening all the time, recursively, month after month, and that's quite traumatic too, and quite developing of particular defenses in behavior. I feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, it's good that you're talking a lot. The thing is, I prefer that. It's just sometimes there's so many thoughts that occur in my head that I'm like, oh, I latch on it. I want to ask you that. I want to touch on it, but then I don't want to disrupt you. So I'm just also trying to manage that.
Yeah, I know.
But you touched on emotional regulation and dysregulation. Emotional dysregulation. Is that something, I guess maybe even pertaining to specific disorders, is that something that you find can be cured or just managed?
I think emotions are not to be cured. I think that emotions are actually inherently natural. And I do have a belief that emotions are there to help us. They're inherent built-in systems that are there to help us, understand when we should be cautious, when we are, enjoying ourselves, for instance, so we can keep pursuing some of the same things. Also when when we need to leave a situation, for instance, where something's not serving us anymore. So I think we grew up in a society that is it's like an emotional, like feudal age where it was more so about not listening to the emotions, shove them down, especially in growing up in minority cultures. It could be not necessarily about listening to your emotions. I talk to many patients, I ask them on purpose, like when you were sad, like how did your parents speak, and you express it to your parents, like what was something that you commonly heard? Most people will tell me, I'll give you something to cry about. So when someone was sad, right, the parent, who obviously is also emotionally stunted or immature, was threatened by the child's emotions and then threatened them, right? So it's this recursive cycle where now this person doesn't really understand how to move through sadness or how to move through fear, right? And so they just think they're not supposed to have it, never really learning how to actually manage it.
Now they develop like a fear of fear.
Right.
Yeah.
They develop a fear of fear, or like even in social anxiety, they're just so scared they're going to, humiliate themselves, but they're confidently scared that they're going to humiliate themselves, right? They don't even understand how confident they are in the fearfulness that they have that they're going to humiliate. I was like, so the confidence is there, but it's misdirected in a different way. So having to unlearn these things is kind of wild at times, but I think people can actually learn, like these are not things that were taught to us early on. So when you kind of have that grace of, actually, these were very learnable. No one actually did the effort to do this with us. So self-regulation now becomes kind of our goal. And I love to say, just because mom and dad gave us Linton and paper clips worth of emotional regulation, maybe that was the best they could do. Maybe they didn't try. But here's what it takes to thrive on this side here. And we want to fill in these gaps out of a love for ourselves, right? So that we don't remain this child that doesn't know how to do these things, right? And just kind of bull in a china shop our way through people's lives and hurt them. It's like, no, we can actually learn how to calm down. We can deliberately bring peace into our lives on purpose, right? And make a conscious effort to do so. And it's just having these conversations with people to make it feel like it's possible, I think. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. You answered it right away. It was right after I said, can it be cured? I was like, well, it's not something to cure. It's just It is more like, can you manage it?
It's a mastery. It's a skillfulness. And it's just even allowing the emotions to be there. I tell patients all the time, like, do it scared, right? If you're scared to do something, but we don't, the extreme of that would be agoraphobia. You just stay in the house and life passes you by. And then you were like, man, I wish I would have done all these things, on your deathbed. But that's obviously not what we're trying to aim for. So the idea is to relate to fear in a new way, and constantly kind of build that new neurocircuitry, build that new pathway, the neuroplasticity there, so that it doesn't feel so severe.
The fear of fear thing that I mentioned, that seems to be, I would say, the most common thing, right? Wouldn't you say? I mean, that you even come across.
Yeah.
Everybody's really, really scared.
I know.
Yeah, because I think to make change, I think in this society and where we live is very difficult. Because especially where we worked, right? Like working with lower income individuals, people who coming from, like you said, the minority background, where there's you may not have learned, right, how to deal with emotions or how to deal with change and scary situations, right? Like you said. So yeah, I think it's very true that there is this sense of, and Jordan, I mean, I always like to defer to you if this is a good way of thinking about it, right? Of kind of just simplifying it. It's like there's a lack of trusting your gut of when it's time to make a change, and also just to make a change is very difficult, right? If it wasn't, if quitting smoking, was easy, everybody would, it wouldn't be a problem, right? You wouldn't seek help for it, right? Same thing with drinking, right? Substance abuse. I think there is a lot of fear because it's also painful. It's a painful process, right? I just recently, quit caffeine cold turkey, and it was painful. It was a painful process.
It's too bad I just bought you a coffee.
But I mean, that's something that I would see, right? When as a mental health case manager, just because there was a lot of fear of asking for help. There was this. I would always, when I would have to ask what their strengths, are, a lot of them couldn't give me an answer. And what I would always offer is, well, I would say, hey, what if I offer this one to you and you tell me if it's true or not? I said the willingness to ask for help is a strength, and we're talking right now because you were willing to ask for help. I'm here because you saw Dr. Rivera and you saw your therapist, and they said that you need to get connecting with housing, or maybe there's domestic violence and we need to, you don't know where to go. I'm here to help you get there. So, and a lot of them would say, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. I always appreciated that Arnold Schwarzenegger came out and said that I had help, and that's how I became successful, But, my second favorite physician after Jordan, of course, is Dr. Myron Roll. And he would say that he got to where he was because he asked for help. So I think that fear of just getting rejected, right? Or that even with the help, nothing's going to change. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think those are wonderful words that you said there. My mom used to actually tell me, and this is kind of my own thing too, about like being a bull in a china shop, but still, figuring it out some way, somehow.
In relation to you, she called you that?
My mom would actually say the squeaky wheel gets the grease, meaning like if you don't speak up, then like you're not going to get, you're not going to fix this thing. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of taught me to always just like, it doesn't matter how stupid you sound, but like ask the question, do this thing, to get more information, and eventually just kind of let that information build on itself. So just don't be afraid to look dumb when it comes to your own life. And yeah, there's a stigma around looking like needing help. You need help from someone and you don't know how to figure it out. But no one taught us these things. So just helping people to kind of understand that more so about, it makes sense why, you might feel this way. And simultaneously, we can always learn something new. And that's what this is about. That's what wellness is about. It's a lifelong game, right? We're not going to be able to cope with everything every single time. We're going to have to like revisit coping. We were talking about fear of fear, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, just also getting people to understand, like when we have that fear, it's kind of like it's actually like the limbic friction. There's like this acetylcholine kind of being released. It's a growing out of our comfort zone when we're doing something fearful. So if we can reframe or switch the idea that fear is, telling us to like run away or not do it. Instead say, oh, this is what it feels like to grow out of my comfort zone. I can get through this. This is actually for my betterment. On the other side of this is what I'm looking to, to fulfill. It helps to kind of dissipate that charge a little bit, right, from a mindful place. So I really want to help. I want to help people change their relationship to fear, in that sense. But a lot of them need a lot more support to even kind of build that insight around it too.
How does one differentiate between those kind of fears? Is this a rational fear that I'm experiencing, or is this something my body's just accustomed to and I'm just now scared of everything?
Yeah, I would say it's both, right? It's really interesting because as you develop, or I'm really big on mindfulness, and there's like mindfulness-based strategies, which really kind of gets to the point of being aware of the emotions, being aware of the thoughts, being aware of the sensations. Like someone's aware of what these things are, right? So someone has to be kind of like the center and then interpret what's going on. And rather than just kind of like assume, oh, anxiousness,
right?
Oh, this is, gonna fail this thing. Instead of just having these automatic assumptions, we want to get to a place of where we're observing the thinking, observing the emotional state, observing the sensations in the body, and then seeing how it's causing us to move and act, right? And whether or not that aligns with who we want to be. So a lot of, when we talk about rational fears, we have to understand what is it that we're rationalizing, right? Are we rationalizing doubting ourselves? Are we rationalizing that we can't have this wonderful life because I'm not smart enough, right? And is that the favorite version of ourselves? Would they rationalize that? So rationalization comes from your being who you are in alignment with. So when people are just like, well, I'm hopeless, right? They're perpetuating the hopelessness, but they feel sad about it. So you wouldn't be dysregulated if you were okay with hopelessness. You'd actually be quite grounded, right? But the reality is that's not how you want to believe it. So what we have to do is develop a sense of you don't really actually want to believe that. We have to unlearn that and actually get you to resonate with beliefs that you do want to follow, right? And change is hard, but that's your mission now, is to learn how to believe in yourself, right? And to start to starve off certain patterns of thinking that are upholding this state, this mood that you ultimately don't want to be in and are taking medications for, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. Just trying not to make this about myself.
I would love to hear.
It's okay, you're not alone, Brian. We're all on this game.
No,
go for it, Brian.
No. I got to pay him by the hour at this point. Yeah.
No, I feel free everyone. I'm here for the liberation of all. Like, no one taught us, and it's so just interesting to think about how so much more we could all be more regulated and more in tune with ourselves and be more authentic had we, had a little bit more information about how our mind works and what we're observing and what thoughts we're going to honor and not,
No, go ahead. 'Cause I think I've spoken a lot.
No, well, I want to hear more from you though, Brian. But I think it's interesting because you hear all this stuff, right? You hear dysregulation. You hear people who are afraid of things. And then I think what comes to mind is that, this is just something that certain people from certain backgrounds deal with. And as we heard earlier, right? I mean, your dean was dealing with clearly, a lot of darkness within himself, right? That for whatever reason, he's dealing with it in a way that unfortunately led to him, getting in trouble, right? Probably hurting people, misrepresenting himself. I mean, to me, it's interesting that those are also just as interesting stories to hear, because I think those are the people that at least where we grew up, you look at those people and they're like, oh, they're successful. They did it. They must have the skills. But I think as it turns out, a lot of people just white knuckle it, right? They just say, I'm going to get through this and I'm going to hide my addictions. I'll dysregulate at home or whatever. They're able to get through the gauntlet, right? Of getting through college, getting through high school, right? Getting through college, then getting through med school, right? Then residency. And then eventually they're, at a university, right? They become dean. And at some point, look what happens, right? I think that it happens. It could happen to anybody, right? And like you said, a lot of us, even those people who we view as probably being successful, maybe they themselves, that's as far as it could take them, right? To be dysregulated, and those coping mechanisms, they don't offer that kind of balance, right?
Yeah, and like success by itself is, it may not be like the best measure for a life that you feel like you're thriving in, right?
Right.
Ultimately, success at work or achievements or accomplishments is really interesting too when you think about attachment theories and how certain children got, how they felt the most loved, right? Where sometimes it was through actions and having to achieve and earn, play the sports so that people were giving them a little bit of attention or that nugget. So you get that a lot with doctors too, where a lot of people kind of had to, earn affection in a sense, or feel like they had to earn affection. So they go so far, but terrible at relating, right? Terrible at relating with other people because now they've entrained themselves to that things should be earned and that this is more transactory, or, relationships don't, there's a lot more like, what am I getting out of this? More
Right.
so than like just enjoying someone else's presence and beingness. Is really interesting, I think.
Well, that also, at least to me, it brings up another thought, another question. I mean, it seems like, okay, we have to really maintain ourselves as if we're pursuing a goal, right? Which, as I understand, having goals, can be good for us, right? They protect our health. They give us something to look forward to. And when we don't have those things, right, it could really affect us in the opposite way, right? Because like you said, it's like, well, I'm scared to do this, I'm scared to do that. But I also think that part of that maintenance, right, that we have to carry, right, because we have to make sure we pay our bills, right? We have to show up to work. We have to show up for our friends, our loved ones, our partner, our children. And when we don't do that, that's essentially when the chaos can start slipping in, right? And so when I hear these stories of these people who, are achieving success and all of that, but if they leave, when they leave the office, if it's just pure chaos, if it's just pure dysfunction, I guess my question is, what does it really take for those people to start to recognize that, hey, because I think what happens, right, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that part of the belief, the thoughts that they start having is that, oh, I can't walk away from this, right? I can't step away from this situation that maybe I don't want to be in anymore. Do you think that's the case, that a lot of people form that belief of, you know what, I climbed the ladder of success and it's making me miserable? Do you think that's the case?
I definitely think that's definitely one of the roles there is people are afraid of change and transition, what it would look like to start over, right? They trust more in the, even this job, they trust more in the external, like you have the job and the job is safety, rather than you, the one that got that job, right? You're the one that got it in the first place. Get it, you'll get another one. There's plenty. Right. But so where you place that kind of attention, is whether it can be empowering, or it can also be somewhat of a prison, where people feel like, oh, if I can't leave now, I have to, do X, Y, and Z. I'm responsible for all these things, versus maybe more solution oriented of maybe you have these things to think about. How do you create the fantasy that you can do all these things while simultaneously, actually be mindful of how you're feeling and what you need, right? Versus just constantly staying dysregulated, constantly trying to numb it, and not ever really paying attention to it. And our hair is falling out, we're gaining weight a lot faster, testosterone's getting low. I mean, ultimately the idea of pushing through it's not for longevity. I talk to people all the time that are just like, so stressed and they feel like they can't relax. And I said, okay, can you tell me maybe like, what do you deliberately do to help yourself relax during the day? And it's okay if like, there's nothing at all. I just want to get an idea. And they're like, oh, I don't have time to relax. So even the math of that is, okay, we don't have time to relax, so we don't relax, but we're upset that we aren't relaxed, right? So we need to understand that relaxation is a deliberate process that we can get better at, right? And that means it takes your effort, your action, your co-creation of relaxing on purpose such that you feel better, right? We got to step into feeling better. And that requires us to do it. Like in the actual person, right? Can only feel better.
Well, not to mention that there might be a sense of guilt around doing that, right?
Yeah. So people have this idea that they need to be productive all the time. And then that sense of productivity is also distorted, right? Because rest is definitely a part of productivity, right? Knowing how to rest and when to rest and actually makes you more productive than the idea of pushing your way through all the time and then eventually burning out and ruining relationships with people and, providing mediocre work, etc.
Seems to be a glorification, at least in this country, can't speak for others, right? Mm-hmm. Of pushing through and just being on the grind. How do you feel about that? I'm assuming you encounter that all the time with patients too.
Yeah, all the time. I think people definitely feel that they aren't doing enough in their lives and that they need to be doing more. There's so many things to think about at this point in time. I can't imagine 100 years people were thinking about all of these things. So now it's interesting to think that because we're not thinking about, or we have trouble thinking about the multitude of things that there are to think about, now we're disordered. Right. I was like, I don't think we were meant to kind of use the mind in this way or also pay attention to all of these types of thoughts, right? More so the ones that are actually going to relate to how your values, your preferences and standards and stuff. But now we're thinking about everything. So I think that's definitely quite a challenge there. Continue on. Sorry, one more time with the question.
No, I was saying that I find that there's this glorification of pushing through and always grinding.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think
what's the lifestyle psychiatry there, right?
It goes, but yeah, lifestyle psychiatry is kind of understanding that there needs to be a balance to things. But there's also some really good books out there. One of them is called Rest is Resistance. I really enjoy it. I forget the name of the author. It might be like Trisha.
There it is, Trisha.
Yeah, Trisha Hersey. And just the idea of literally practicing rest on purpose because you're an inherent being, like a bear would sit down when it's tired. Like, we don't think we can do that. And like getting back to this sense of resting on purpose is actually how you build clarity, right? When you're constantly in a state of dysregulation, just from like a neuroscience perspective, you're in the amygdala, right? You're in a little bit of a rat brain, right? The lizard brain in a sense. So it's more so about survival. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make the best clear decisions. But when you practice rest, mindfulness, exercise, meditation, yoga, any of this kind of stuff, it helps you move from that mind into your cortex, and that's where you can make decisions and also have a little bit more, intuitiveness, right, about your decisions, not just like what's the least dangerous thing right now, which is a very hard way to live.
Right.
How do you practice your rest?
Ooh, I love that. Your boy has routines. At this point, it's taking years of wanting to not be led by fear and instead led by vision. So I have a bedtime routine. I specifically try to have whether it be like white noise sounds or some type of frequency sound or something that's just a little bit calming. I will often I'll try and journal or something before bed or throughout the day just to kind of get my thoughts together. And I love to meditate. I really love to just be still and be quiet, like on purpose. I will get home. I will whether that's a guided meditation or you're just doing it like just to be quiet.
So give us a day in the life.
You want the day in the life?
I want to know, because a lot of people, ideally have a regimen or a routine that they like to stick to.
Mine's insane right now. I get up at 3:30 in the morning.
What?
Yes.
Who are you, Mark Wahlberg?
I get up at 3:30. I get up at 3:30 in the morning, and I do start a little bit of a early meditation. I then try to do. I'm basically like trying to do something right now between like 4 and 5, like 5:30, working towards a goal of mine. And then from 5:30, I go for a run in Balboa Park, which for me, I really love being out in nature. So I try to get anywhere between like 3 to 5 miles in. And then I do like 30 to 50 burpees, have my breakfast, go to work, like shower and everything, go to work. After that's over, I try to socialize with some friends for a little bit. And then I will do some type of other like meditation or some other type of walk during the day. And then that's it. It's a very simple life at this point. Have dinner, of course.
Man, if you're getting up at 3:30, what time is dinner?
My dinner is probably like 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you're in bed and hopefully
I'm
asleep
in bed by like
by
9:15. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Right now. But I kind of see it as when we're working towards something, like be in Batman mode. Like it's not about caring about every single thing in the world. It's about like focusing on those things that you really need to focus on right now. And it's okay to let other things go, right? Or maybe some people won't understand it, but that's how you get to where you want to go.
So you don't have FOMO because you're focused right now.
Right. Yeah. I don't really have. I still make time to hang out with friends though, and I think that's the part. Like when you do everything, you do have that time. So part of it is having to be it, which sucks, right? I'm not going to wake up at 3:30 forever, but being it allows me the freedom to have fun with friends afterwards and still get to bed like at a reasonable time and stuff. But I have to show up every day.
So you're doing this even on the weekend. So for example, today you actually woke up at 3:30?
No, I didn't make it today. So
Okay.
I'm not perfect every single day.
Yeah.
But I did notice that when you do it every single day, it really takes away that stress of having to constantly get back into the rhythm of it.
Right.
So part of it is maybe just do it every day.
Yeah.
Especially if it makes you feel good, if you feel good about yourself, try to a little bit more. But even if you do 100 days out of 365 days, like the gains are going to be awesome, and you're going to feel really good about what you've been able to accomplish.
So what are you working towards that you're getting up at 3:30?
Right now, so I am actually still going towards my board certification. So
Get closer, by the way. Sorry.
So I'm working towards my board certification. So I'm licensed to practice in the state of California. There's a extra kind of seal you can get that helps you. That says like the state of California backs you.
Gotcha.
It's more for like insurance purposes, but it's like a 9-hour exam. And so I'm just like,
so then you're getting up and
hard for
studying
it.
essentially.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm getting up and studying for it. But it's super helpful actually.
Coffee, tea, anything, any sort of stimulant, you're just up and
Yeah, I do drink coffee. Actually, Diego said this thing once that I really loved. He was like, working out in the morning or going for a run is better than any cup of coffee.
Right.
And he was so right.
He said that.
He said that to me, and I was like, you know what? He's right. And
I may not
practice what you
practice what I preach all the time. But one thing I think I pride myself on is that I'm very self-aware. So I know what's going on.
this guy's spinning bars right now, and you're right. Like I feel so much better getting to work. Literally alert. So it's the season right now. Hobbies, having something to do that you enjoy
outside of work.
Yeah, like so singing. I love to sing, and just even if I'm not like necessarily good, I like to just do it anyway, and so just having that like a place of expression is good. So you're like making time for yourself, actually making time for your beingness to exist and not just kind of like living in the rat race of the society, which of course is going to make you feel like a shell of a person. So, making sure that you're actually making the time for those things is important. Yeah.
That's cool. See, we got
How do you spend
into
your days.
that's the funny thing. I do have a goal, and I do actively work at it. I just am not regimented with my time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, right now I'm in the process of releasing one single per month. So, by the end of the year, I have 12 tunes, and it could be an album or something like that.
I love that.
So yeah, it's not regimented though. It's more like I do have to get to this, and there's a whiteboard over there where I will write what I need to do and tackle. However, it's not like, oh, I'm getting up at 3:30 in the morning and I'm going to work at it at this time. It's more like I like easing into my day. And when I get up, I get up and I, do all the essential things that wake me up. And then if I'm not, training or something at 9 a.m., then yeah, I'll probably start tackling that. Or if I have a gig to prepare for, or I'm teaching later, that I'll lesson prep. So it's kind of a little scattered. It's not, every day is not the same.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
But you're still working towards.
I'm still working towards it. And some days I'll pay for it because it's like, oh, I didn't get to it earlier today. So I guess I'm staying up a little late.
Yeah.
But would you say that comes with being a musician though? Just because like your gigs can be late, maybe later, maybe earlier.
It could be a little bit of that. It could be also just me just putting it off. Because to be honest, like sometimes the hardest thing to do, I think, is just showing up. Once you've shown up, you're like, all right, I could do this. The thing I know about myself is that once I start, it is really hard for me to pull away. So this is, for anything I get really into, I'll like forget to eat. Next thing you know, I'm like parched because I haven't even had a sip of water. It's just, all of a sudden it's dark now. I'm like, oh, the sun went down. Like
You get obsessed.
yeah. So since I do know that, sometimes I won't show up when I like regularly because I'm like, it's gonna take a lot to pull me away.
Yeah.
And I have even like tried to fit it in where I'm like, oh, I'm gonna work on this. I'm gonna do this, but I do have somewhere to be, or I don't have somewhere to be, but like I want to be there. I want to train, let's say at noon or something. Well, I started working on something. Now I'm really into it. And then now I'm like, shit, I don't want to stop this momentum because if I do, I don't know if I'll be able to get that back, but I also want to go to jiu-jitsu.
Right.
Dang.
And it's like, if jiu-jitsu's at 12,
Yeah.
it's like, all right, it's 11:30. If I leave now, I'll be good.
Yeah.
Maybe I have 10 more minutes.
So I
Put it off.
So there are some days where I've even skipped it because next thing you know, I'm like, okay, just a few more minutes. Let me just try doing this. Shit, it's 11:45. I'm not gonna make it. And so yeah, so that stuff happens.
Yeah, absolutely, it happens for sure.
Yeah, so that's the difficulty.
Yeah, I think the regimentedness is like, it's quite a challenge, but for me, I realized like I was thinking about high school and how everything was like hour by hour
Structured.
So it was so structured. And I'm noticing that, even for my patients that have maybe ADHD, that's kind of what we need is just like, tell me where to be, where to go, and what I'm supposed to be doing. And as long as you're kind of there, then you're set, right? But more so, it leaves less space for the distraction. I even have hydrate, on my to-do list, right? Like, so I still be able to check it off.
Yeah.
It's all like part of there, like eat, all of it's part of on the thing for me. But I just felt like simplifying is actually better. Like, I'm not here to care about everything. I think we're not here to care about every single thing under the sun, especially if you're not an expert.
Right.
Having an opinion on something, like, is your opinion necessary?
Right.
When you haven't done any of the research or thought to actually, do this. So I'm more mindful about what I'm thinking about and who I'm thinking about, how I'm relating to things, how am I associating with things. And is it actually aligning with how my favorite version of myself, who I'm trying to show up as? Mm-hmm. And as you do it more so and more so, it gets grounded. Right? That's the cool part. It gets grounded.
It's so funny, man. I was literally having a conversation. I forget with who. And I mentioned almost something similar. You said high school. I was saying school in general, where everything, starts, let's say class, starts at 8 a.m. or something. And then your first math class is 45 minutes or an hour. And then it boom, boom, break, boom, boom, break. And I started recognizing that's actually a fairly efficient way, because if it's happening every day, you start chipping away. So because I know more about my obsessiveness, I do set alarms.
Yes.
And I do say, okay, I'm going to practice this, or I'm going to record this, and that's it. And I've been actually really strict with myself on chipping away for the next tune. So I'll write on the whiteboard, I need to, let's say, address this, or I need to record this, I need to mix this, and then that's it. And once I'm done with that, I have to pull away, or else I'll get lost.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
boundaries and boundaries and limitations can be good, because it seems like, if you're just totally living unregulated, right? Just like how we mentioned, it just doesn't really, it won't, you need to have like those guides for yourself, essentially the alarms, right? Saying, okay, today I'm going to do this.
I need so many alarms.
Just, we can't just go just free, like willy nilly, not have any structure to our day. Right.
And we're not like automatons too. So it's quite challenging. Like your best isn't going to be the same every single day. Not at all. And so, but part of it is that chipping, right?
Right.
It's just that if you do show up, whatever you're showing up and you're doing a little bit, that's going to be better than not doing anything at all. So, sometimes I'm, up in the morning and I'm like, it's 3:30. What am I doing?
What are you doing, Jordan? That's the 3:30. That's
what
too
am I
early.
doing? Like the coffee
Yeah.
machine's going off at 3:20, so that I can smell it by 3:30.
That's so fun. He's Michael Scott with
if you don't get this
George
goal
Foreman.
done, if you don't get this goal done, you know what? Like,
Right.
trying to get started. But yeah, no, I think discipline is good. Emotional regulation is in. I think emotional regulation is sexy. I think we need to start supporting more and more people being able to regulate themselves, know who they are, live authentically, and kind of just see, relate better with other people over time, just through them knowing themselves better.
What emotion would you say you struggle with regulating most?
Ooh, what emotion do I struggle with regulating the most?
And also, what do you find your patients struggle with the most, if you can answer that? But you first.
I would probably say like maybe anger.
Anger.
Right? So if at some point you feel criticized, or like that could be the defense that comes up from my own vulnerability, right?
Right.
The need to feel like to get angry because I feel, that my boundary's been crossed for me or so. But sometimes, that anger could look like snapping at someone, right? And that might not necessarily promote
Right.
a harmonious relationship with somebody if, you're handling conflict like that all the time. So I think that's definitely like a personal one that I've grown in over time too, to get better at.
How did you get better at? What did you?
Meditation.
Meditation.
Becoming unbothered, unmoved by appearances. Yes. That's pretty much what I've done. I'm like, okay, this has nothing to do with me. Whatever this person's doing right now is like more so a reflection of them. But it took a lot of like insight building.
You're able to do that in real time?
Now I can do it in real time.
Nice.
But it wasn't that it's all the time. And sometimes like, you're still going to get frustrated,
Right.
but now you're noticing it and you're not mad at yourself for getting frustrated. You're just like, okay, hold on a second. I'm getting frustrated. Let's come back. But now you can see it, right? So there's a difference in how you're showing up to the frustration or to the upsetness versus some people who also still deal with anger might be in a different place and they're like, they deserve to be hit. And that's where they're at. But they're dysregulated, right? So part of it is, okay, but you're saying that, but I don't think you really believe that to be in alignment with who you want to be, right? So we might have to make a transition.
Right. Well, not to mention the consequences that could come from that.
Right. So, but we've lost another house, or we've, now we're in jail again, or there's a lot of stuff going on here. We lost another job because we keep thinking that this behavior is the ultimate behavior to participate in right now. Right. So
What about, what about patients, or maybe just society in general that you've observed? What is the emotion you think the masses struggle with the most? Is it also anger? Are we just an angry society?
I would definitely say there's a lot of frustration, just fear. It's really fear.
Fear.
Fear of not being able to make ends meet, fear of things not being able to change in their life, fear of like people's ill health and how their bodies are like they don't trust their bodies to take care of themselves. I would say, fear is quite rampant. And then also when you're just chronically under distress and in fearful states, that leads you to feeling depressed, right? It leads you to feeling quite low because it feels, it generates a sense of hopelessness that things can change. So they kind of go hand in hand a lot of the time. But definitely
I would
fear.
agree based on what I could see.
Yeah. And we even promote fear. Like generally it's like in the society itself, right? Through the movies we watch and through the news that we listen to. It's so like, we're inundated with this thing, blowing up cars when you're watching something at 8 a.m. You're watching a meme and it's just like cars blowing up or something. So just like
3:30 for you.
Right.
It's like, oh, this is like, but we can get so dysregulated to like horrific things in this society. And then now our like baseline state of sympathetic activity is like much higher. Right.
So we're become desensitized a bit.
And then
chronically like stressed and cortisoled out. For sure.
I would be remiss if I didn't actually bring up our sponsor, Magic Mind. In the podcast, you actually see me drinking one. And I was so absorbed in the conversation with Jordan that I completely forgot to even offer him one or even offer Diego one. It's something that I've been drinking for the past few months now, and I love it. It's pretty much become my coffee replacement when I start my day. It's just an all-natural nootropic, all natural ingredients, including matcha, various mushrooms, ashwagandha, and it just kind of boosts my memory. It straight up just kind of gets me really, really focused and honed in. That's part of my routine. I drink a glass of water, take a shot of Magic Mind, and I'm off to the races, whether training or, just responding to emails, whatever it is that I have to do. Right now, we have a promo code where you will get 56% off of your subscription. You just go to magicmind.com/morningdrinkers or just magicmind.com and place your order. And before you check out, make sure you put Morning Drinkers to get the discount. So there are two things actually I wanted to bring up, and I sent them to you as well. One of them being, what is your main area of focus, essentially, in your practice? Is it PTSD, depression, anxiety, all of the above? And is there a particular mental illness that you are drawn to, that you find the most fascinating? And why?
Yeah, I would say, so right now I'm pretty much a generalist, right? When it comes to psychiatry. So I see a lot of depression, anxiety, but gratefully was able to train at the UCLA VA program. So I was very familiar with PTSD, worked in an ADHD clinic. I mean, they had all of the different types of kind of specializations that you could to go into. So I got some really excellent training there. Substance as well. So I would say I'm kind of a generalist. I like it all because a lot of it, these are words. So, they're describing symptoms. So describing how like people are kind of the last bits of expression that are showing up for people, right? So I like to like kind of not think about the labels as much, even though we can help people. Sometimes it can be quite helpful for people to know what they're working with, but to also understand like what these expressions of symptoms are and what we ultimately have to do to help ourselves, right? Yeah, you can take a medication to help with impulsivity, but if you don't want to be an impulsive person, how do we deliberately try to make you a more patient person, right? And so allowing people to understand the symptoms from that direction, I think is helpful. I like trauma. I think it's helpful to be able to, I've had my own life experiences and just being able to kind of be this voice, be a doctor now, coming from like the hood essentially, and not knowing how to get here.
That's your handle, Hood Doc.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it's really humbling to be able to have had experiences where the patients have had the same ones, and to kind of, give them some reassurance that they can get through it. So I think complex PTSD is something that we don't talk about enough. We often think about it in terms of one incident, like a motor vehicle accident or getting shot, or some type of gang violence, but repeated trauma over time.
That's what complex PTSD means?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where people can just start to develop really, they develop defense mechanisms that might be helpful, maybe even manipulative, like while growing up, but that don't serve them later on in life, right? And now they're getting into situations where there's a lot of interpersonal conflict with people. Maybe they don't have friends. There's a lot of things that like ultimately aren't serving them anymore.
What do you mean about the manipulative?
So
That's a coping mechanism?
yeah. So you can think about certain types of personalities. Like our personality is what we feel safe to show, right? So whatever personality you're kind of expressing is what you feel safest showing. And there's also a vulnerable part to us as well that we don't necessarily feel always so safe to show. So some people can have personalities that are safe to show that are actually really like not helpful for their own lives, right? You can think about that through like borderline or cluster B, or even narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial. But it's not that it just happened in a vacuum. Like people had to adapt and develop these types of things to get what they needed. So you can see people in a new way, like why they might be narcissistic or why they might be borderline, how they were treated earlier on, and how now maybe that worked then, but as a 50-year-old man, it's not going to work for you anymore, right? You can't do that. You can't act in those particular ways, all dysregulated, wonder why you don't have friends or why you keep losing your job, et cetera, et cetera. So being able to help people see that can help them also to kind of unlearn particular aspects that they want to change about their personality too, because it is malleable. So I think that's a cool aspect of it too.
And a few things, I think, especially since I heard you mention one of them, it's get them to recognize that, right? So a lot of these personality disorders, a lot of people are not aware, right, that their ways of moving through the world, right, especially through their personality, is not helpful. So would you say that's a major challenge, right? Because because they're just so unaware, right? They've just been existing this way, and the other thing I was going to mention is that the dysregulation. I think a lot of people don't realize that it's not necessarily. I think people confuse, for example, being borderline or just being generally dysregulated with necessarily having bipolar disorder. It's not necessarily the case. Is that true?
Yeah. I think there might be some overlap in between certain things, but that's why I really like to go into the trauma aspect of it, because you can get a lot of people diagnosed with like a bipolar diagnosis. And when I ask them about what that means, they're like, oh, my mood changes up and down like throughout the day. That's not bipolar disorder, right? Like bipolar disorder is like really discrete. Like I'm not sleeping for a period of time, and like during that, several days of not sleeping, I'm kind of messing up my life, and I'm really disorganized. Whereas someone who's constantly like emotionally dysregulated more so shows that they, things can change in the day, and basically whatever circumstance is going on, they are relying on the external to feel safe, right? They don't have a sense of like emotional like boundaries or unbotheredness or sense of worthiness and esteem within themselves, which can develop when, maybe your family was kind of trash and didn't actually give you a sense that you could feel safe, right? Or you did have to earn it or work for things, essentially. That makes sense. So personality is also something I think is cool, because we can think about it as a way of like not just looking at things from a trauma perspective or depressive perspective, but how are we showing up? How are we showing up to these circumstances, right? When someone doesn't treat us well, why do we feel like we deserve to die? right? Let's math that out real quick, right? It's coming from somewhere. So I love to work with people on that kind of stuff. I know.
Okay, well, I mean that it's still it's because there's so much. No. It's because there's a lot. I'm giving Brian some space too in case he wants to ask questions. I think that's one of the it's one of the common misconceptions, right? Is that personality, who you are, is so crucial. It's so crucial to exist. I mean, it just goes without saying, right? But how that lack of self-awareness, right? I mean, ultimately, one has to have insight to recognize, oh, okay, when I do this, when I act this way, right, or when I react to things like this, it's causing these issues. I think one of the challenges, right, in mental health is that you can't force anyone to get treatment. I think maybe some people think that you can, and you just can't. I think that a lot of just a lot of people when I talk to them, some of them would be surprised when they ask me like what I do, like what I would do with those warm handoffs. And if a patient, is telling me that they don't want to talk to me, they don't want to be connected to mental health, then I said, okay, have a nice day. We can't force them because they have to have that kind of insight, right, to come to you and ask for that kind of help, right? And I think it has to do with just that kind of having that autonomy, right? Respecting the patient's autonomy.
Yeah, and then people might come in, they might not be ready, like it might not be their season, but they might come back, right, in a couple of months or 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. That's not uncommon for people to realize, oh, I did need the help, and I still want the help, and I need to, I changed my mind. So you're just meeting people at different stages of where they're at when it comes to facing themselves, and also, people are living in a hard time and financially. Like we don't want to pretend that that's not going on. It's hard to be trying to figure out like your money schemes when you're also operating from a survival mode, right? And have an abusive partner or something. Like there's a lot to be thinking about to plan your escape here. So part of it is just letting people see, like, I understand why it would be hard to figure everything out right now.
Right.
And still, how do we take care of ourselves in the midst of this so that we can figure it out and get you out of this?
Do you often see people with, personality disorders, the borderline, the narcissists? Do you often see them coming to you on their own accord, or is it like, are they aware enough that they're like, something's up, I'm going to go seek help? Or is it usually, I've been told by many people that this is who I am or something?
Yeah, so some people definitely they actually might come in with a different diagnosis, like bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I like to do a developmental history. So I start from the beginning and try to understand any elements of like emotional neglect or abuse or exploitation or any of these things, foster care, any of these kinds of things growing up that would potentially suggest that someone didn't learn how to regulate their emotions or was abandoned, literally, right? Literally abandoned, right? And part of like borderline would be a chronic sense of emptiness and fear of abandonment. So part of it is like, oh, well, when someone's actually abandoned, they might actually, have a deep sense of fear about being abandoned. So let's talk about that, So I think a lot of times I try to really reflect on the diagnoses and see, are these true or are these potentially misdiagnosed? And that's why we've been in this system for so long, mm-hmm. right? Because personality, you can't just take a medicine for that, right? You can't take a medicine for that. But so it requires a bunch of insight into somehow the way I'm showing up might not actually be my favorite version of myself either. And I want to change that, but people really egoically defend how they're showing up, even if it's, at the cost of their relationships and jobs and et cetera. Yeah.
Wow.
It's tough. I mean, it just goes to show, I think that for you, Jordan, my next question is, it just goes to show how powerful, I think, just being loved, can be, right? I mean, ultimately, when you don't have that, especially from your moment of birth, if you lack that, it's like I think I remember once I was talking to one of the staff members at the clinic about this. I told him that if you think about it, love in many ways it's like a force of nature that is so crucial to who we become, right? Then when we don't have it, a lot of negative consequences follow that, especially not knowing what love is. And so I guess my question to you, Jordan, is what has, being a psychiatrist, going through this training, taught you about love and essentially the human condition, right? As to, receiving it, how crucial it is for life, right? Having those connections and how ultimately either not having it can affect us or having it and what it can do for us.
Yeah, that's a really deep question. I love that question, actually. Let me see if I can give like a thoughtful answer for it. I think it's quite a powerful force of, this desire to feel connected. I think we all get that together. And then on top of that, I think on the outside of that, like desire to be connected, we also kind of want to just be accepted, right? Without necessarily all the strings attached. Having to do, I call it shucking and driving, but like having to do all the shucking and driving just to get a morsel of attention or some type of affection. So a lot of us don't grow up that way. A lot of us are like, grew up in households with really emotionally immature or like blunted parents. So they're avoidant of emotions, or they're like hyper, they can be like hyper fixated on monitoring you and making you anxious that anything bad can happen. And they love you, but it's also just like so unconscious. It's like a blind leading the blind thing, right? So you end up feeling that love's not unconditional. You actually feel like it's more conditioned. And so if someone's not showing up in a particular way, then there's a fear that you won't be able to experience love. Love is a choice, right? Love is a choice. It's how you ultimately accept someone and decide to show up for them in all of their good and bad ways, right? It's not that you lose attraction to this person and now I'm not in love. That's attraction, right? That's not love. So part of it is also going back to the nuances yet again of love is actually a commitment to this particular individual or a hobby or whatever it is, through the good and the bad, right? Not necessarily based on feeling a sense of attraction towards something per se. That might start that interest in it, but attraction and then a conscious decision to show up for somebody in all these different ways through the good and the bad is very different, whether that's for friends or for a romance.
I'm glad you said that love is a choice. I find that that's not something said that often, and I agree with you on that. When is love not enough?
It's often not enough. Yeah. I would say that, especially when it comes to relationships, like romantic relationships, it's one thing to love somebody. What's another example I could use? Like I love, you could really love McDonald's, right? The idea of McDonald's. It doesn't mean that you should be eating it every day just because you love it, right? So sometimes just because you love something doesn't necessarily mean that you need to relate to it in the same way that you've been currently relating to it. So in relationships, that happens all the time where people are in these abusive cycles and they're like, but I love this person. And it's really that you're bonded, but ultimately there's a lot of incompatibilities here that we're letting pass because we say we're in love. And the reality is the most loving thing you could do is to like stop hurting each other, right? Like you guys are hurting each other a lot. And we want to just keep being together in a sense of compromise at the cost of our individuality, right? At the cost of everything that we value for the relationship. So what we breed is resentment and contempt for one another. When the really loving thing would be to sometimes separate or let this person be their true authentic self elsewhere, even if it doesn't necessarily harmonize with your own And that's some like grown up talk, right? That's like some grown up talk, right? You got to let them go.
True.
But sometimes there's things that are like wholly incompatible, and people want to feel needed and they want that attraction. And so they kind of keep getting into these recursive cycles. But love's not enough a lot of times, because it's not the only thing that, harmonious relating, emotionally reciprocative relating is, about. It's an aspect of it, but it's not like everything.
So the most loving act there, in a sense, could actually just be walking away and saying, "Hey, you gotta be you."
Oh yeah, and especially if it's toxic behavior, I think that's something that I've grown to understand through patients and just in life over time. They're pushing you to move away, right? If there's a lot of toxic behavior there, it's kind of like almost in a sense giving you the ability to move to not be there, right? To not engage with the disharmony, to not try and oscillate along with that. Let it speak for itself, right? And the loving thing you could do is to go and not try to like force this harmony to be yours, when it's just not going to be,
And I think that to connect it back, right, to the overall theme, right, is mental health, mental illness, wellness. It just goes to show how important it is to create boundaries, right? To protect your own well-being, right? To promote it, right? I mean, if love's not enough, if it's not the only thing, then boundaries. I think a lot of it's hard to wrap your head around that idea, right? Especially depending on where you come from, right? So if you come from a place where you were always expected to give all of your time to your siblings or your parents or whatever, if that's what's expected of you, how are you gonna? When is there going to be time to fill your own cup, right?
Yeah.
From which you could pour. So would you say that in terms of mental wellness and maybe being an important difference between being mentally ill versus being mentally well is the capacity to say no to people, to set boundaries, right? To say, hey, I can't do this, or and it's okay, or maybe, I'm not comfortable with this. This is what I need to operate. I mean, would you say that that's part of the wellness versus the illness?
Yeah, I would definitely say that leaning towards the side of mental wellness, you could even think about this for like why therapy is important. Get to know yourself, right? What are your I'm looking at it from a romance perspective, but you can do this for just generally platonic relationships, any relationship really. But, get to know yourself. Who are you? What are your values? What are the non-negotiables, right? How do you want to be treated? What are your preferences and standards? Because when you get to know these things more deeply about yourself, you get to live more authentically. And so people get the real version of you, not the one that's chasing, right? Trying to fill a need or fill a hole through another person. Instead, you just actually are like, this is who I am. Now I know. I sat down with myself and I understand. And there's going to be people that come into life and like kind of like cog-like. They'll either be compatible or workable that with genuine characteristics that fit your life, or they won't, And the goal isn't to just like fit with people who don't necessarily fit with you, especially now that you know yourself, right? So it's resting in that piece of this is who I am, and someone's gonna love it, and someone's gonna find this, they're gonna catch the vibe, and it's gonna be fine. But I don't have to sit here and try to make it happen, right? With somebody else, and then that's where you can truly feel the best, authentic relationship with someone else and relate harmoniously, is because you're being yourself and someone like sees it and wants to be a part of it, right? Versus you're constantly trying to like be the cool girl, the cool guy, not texting first and doing all the games that ultimately have nothing to do with relating harmoniously, right? So it's just
I am
some grown-up talk, right?
I am guilty of that at times. In the past, I have been guilty of that.
3 hours, let me text it back now. Don't want to seem too eager.
Yeah, because it's an insecurity thing. You don't want to come across as like needy or just too eager, so you play it cool.
Exactly.
And I admit,
of course.
I did that.
Everyone, I feel like we all do. But when we can also rest in that authenticity, like this, being able to host this podcast, being able to like have this band and put put on amazing concerts. I mean, that's what gets people, when you're living as your true self, like that's what gets people out of their chairs, right? Not necessarily like the chase and the pretending and the acting as someone that you're not.
And we had people out of their chairs.
Oh, absolutely. Including Jordan.
I couldn't sit down.
Wow. I did have like one last thing on what I sent you. And then, I mean, if you wanted to tackle something else as well. Any thoughts on pop psychology? You know what I mean by that? You know, for example, psychologists, psychiatrists, even coaches, YouTube, social media with a strong following. Does this do more harm than good?
Yeah, I think this is a great question to think about because I'm not going to say it necessarily does more harm than good, but I think it's important to use discernment when you're looking at particular information. I mean, as a doctor, I'm like pretty good at being able to sift through things and understand what might be of use and what might not necessarily be that useful. And it's just like some influencer's channel, right? But I think overall it's for the better. I think we're seeing that there's more and more people talking about and becoming more associated with the lingo for mental, for mental health, which makes them more aware. And the more we build awareness, the more that we can actually start to actually think about these concepts, how we're showing up. But it's a double-edged sword because, not everyone's a narcissist. And if you're just looking at stuff that keeps talking about what a narcissist does and, you think everything's a hammer, you might start calling all these people narcissist. So some people have to develop an insight where they're like, I knew that my partner was a narcissist, And it's like, well, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. It might be a little bit more nuanced than that. Because their life's not disordered, right? So they might not necessarily be a narcissist right now. But ultimately, that's the kind of stuff where we have to think about where people do get a sense of validation from being, from if they were abused, that kind of stuff can come up. But other than that, I think it's helpful. I think a lot of people can learn stuff in tidbits, and there's like phenomenal mental health professionals that do like live streams on Instagram. I've done a Clubhouse talk with like Dr. Thema. I mean, she's like literally the American Psychological Association president right now. And we killed it, and just being able to get information out. So I think social media can be quite helpful, but yes, if you're kind of on your own digging through some stuff, you might, there's a lot of dark psychology out there too. Right. A lot about like trying to manipulate, a lot about alpha males and like simps, and you just got to be, discernment is the key. Like, what are we watching? Why are we watching it?
Right.
But yeah, that's what I would say about that for sure.
Okay, I was leaning towards, I think it's probably a good thing because it's at least bringing some sort of awareness to the general population. And
for sure.
And I feel like it'd be a quick fix on your part too, to be like, oh, well, that's actually incorrect. And then, but whatever it is that brought someone to you, I think that's probably a good thing.
And I think one of the like interesting thing, right, like facts, right? Or just, I would say one of the interesting facts is that, like, for example, like therapy is not for everyone, right? Sometimes some people just want to just see you. They don't necessarily see a therapist. It's just they get the medication, right? And they're able to manage, right? It's not necessarily that you just have to go to therapy and have a psychiatrist. You figure out which one works for you, right?
Yeah. I definitely tell patients that because since we live we're practicing like a very low income system, the therapy could be anywhere between like a month out, sometimes 2 months out. Right. And I question what's the use of seeing someone every 6 weeks to 2 months if we're trying to kind of transform the way that we're thinking, right? So some people, they benefit from just being able to see me, but then also now we have these resources where they can therapize themselves in certain senses. Some people are motivated. They don't necessarily need to pay hundreds of dollars for a therapist to learn their own mind. They could be self-inquirers. And I encourage people to like, hey, like think about your thinking and like why you think the thoughts that you think. Mm-hmm. It's your mind, right? Who's minding your mind, right? We don't always have to pay other people per se. This is just like the hood in me coming out. We don't always got to pay everyone else to like learn how to use our mind, right?
Right.
it shouldn't just be me that knows how to use it. I learned it from books and everything. So like, let's help you do that. And then being able to help facilitate them through that process. I'm not saying that.
What's a good book for me then? Oh, what's a good book?
I mean, there's so many.
The body keeps the score.
There's so many. How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. That one actually kind of goes into psychedelics a bit as well.
I know Michael Pollan.
Yeah. I would say I'm kind of a big fan of Napoleon Hill, like early Napoleon Hill books from the 1913s, where there's just a different time period, but people talk about like how to own your own mind essentially was a big deal. Very first like steps of self-help in 1913. But wonderful ways of being able to kind of understand the importance of a mental diet, right? And there's even a book, Mental Diet by Emmett Fox. That's a fantastic book to think about. What's on the... And then a classic one would be Feeling Good by Dr. David Burns. So these are all kind of, ways to understand cognitive distortions, like the biases that we think from, ways we could think that might be more of use to us, how to organize thinking itself. It takes a type of person that wants to kind of show up and do this stuff. But as you do it, I mean, when you're like owning that mind, now life is just so much more fun and playful, and you love the thoughts that you have and the emotions that are expressed through that too. That's the goal. That's the end goal. Fall in love with your life, right? Tell a story worth telling. It's not about just constantly like expecting the worst, but you gotta kind of prune the garden of the mind to get there, essentially.
I think part of the pruning, right? I think I don't know how much time we have left, but I think it's an important topic to touch on, at least briefly, is substance abuse. Right. I mean, I think for a lot of individuals, right, that's part of the pruning, right, is to have to, get rid of it, right? That's like, it could be such an enormous challenge for a lot of people, right? Especially since alcohol is everywhere, it can be so addicting. In your practice, right? Would you say that a lot of the patients that you work with they have the dual diagnosis, right? Substance use disorder with something else. Is that the case?
Yeah. I'm noticing that there's definitely a lot of substance use. It's really interesting too. Like when people have a history of psychosis, maybe some history of like they're diagnosed with schizophrenia, but you realize that they've received those diagnoses after using maybe methamphetamine heavily for a long time. So they're quite developed states of paranoia, reliance on the substances. So I think that part can get quite challenging, the addictive part, because we have to, it's still insight building again. But it goes back to emotional regulation. Like, here's I like to talk with patients. Here's an objective scene, right? Whatever, my bill, I have a bill that's late, for instance, whatever. There's a bill that's late. That's just no emotions, just it is what it is, right? It was due on this day and it's late. Then you have your thoughts about that. What thoughts come up?
Late fees.
Oh my gosh, I never have enough money. Now I'm gonna have to pay extra fees. Now I don't have, where am I supposed to get this money from? And I won't have this for that, etc. What are the emotions that come up, around those thoughts? It could be, distress. It could be sadness. It could be fear. It could be isolation, feeling alone. But like whatever emotions might come up. And then what sensations in your body do you feel? Maybe it's chest tightness. Maybe it's like a lump in your throat. You're feeling like your heart's it's racing. But just seeing these happen, writing them down on paper and seeing it all happen lets you know these are the things that actually urge you to do a behavior. This is why you're going to do that heroin again. This is why you're going to use the alcohol again.
To escape.
Because it feels discomforting, the emotions and the thoughts that you're experiencing right now. And the one way of coping with this discomfort that we might understand at the time is that substance. So we're behaving in this way to ultimately soothe us. But when we become mindful, we can say, oh, while this is what I might have done in the past, my favorite version of myself is actually doing this to take care of themselves now, right? And it's getting people to understand, like, there's other ways to soothe yourself, write some rap lyrics. Let's go do something else right now, But for now, we've been entrained to think that this is the only way. It's just familiar, but it's not the only way. So I think getting people to actually understand, like, these behaviors come from above. It's like a downward process. And ultimately, as we do the things that we want to do or show up the way we want to, it's kind of like going to the gym. You always feel good. You feel relief after doing that. We're looking for relief, not shame, right? After it. So being mindful of that type of experience.
It's like the patient that goes to you, right, and says, "Oh, my life is horrible. My life sucks because of this, and that. But the weed helps or the alcohol helps." And it's just like, well, what is it helping? Because you just told me your life sucks, right?
Yeah,
it helps me. It helps me forget that it sucks, dude.
It's catching those, even just catching those sentences there, and just being like, "What?" But if you still feel like your life sucks, like in what way? And you just have grace on people. You know, they just want to feel better. And so I think letting them know there's many ways to feel better, and that you're here to help them. Like, it's just so purposeful. It's meaningful. And it's liberating. Like, I'm here for the people to reclaim their agency of their own minds. So,
would you say that's one of the most important aspects is the agency, right? It's feeling like you have that healthy sense of control, right? That allows you to be well, right? Allows you to move through life. Absolutely.
I think so. Especially kind of growing up here in San Diego and Spring Valley, very low income, under the federal poverty line. You know, there's a line from this musical, The Color Purple, where one of the characters, the main character, is like going to go to Memphis and like is basically fleeing the city that she was, you know, lived in her whole life. And her husband at the time was like, "Where are you going to go? You're black, you're ugly, you're poor," and basically was just saying all these different things. And she said, "I might be all these things, but I'm here." Right? I'm here. And that's like the inherent worthiness of existence itself is more than whatever labels we're trying to use to define our worth. Like, the worth comes before the labels do, right? And that always stood out to me as a really like important thing. And so like maybe being Black and Mexican, that's also just been like an encouraging vibe throughout my whole life. So part of it is helping other people see that, reclaiming their agency. This is your life, not letting other people tell you what is worthy or not about you. You're already here, right? Right. You made it. Right? If you weren't worthy to be here, you wouldn't exist, right?
Right.
So you're like, start from there, and then like, what do we want to do while we're here now? So since we got here. And I feel like it's just been a healthy and loving approach to working with our patient population.
Wow. I think that's a nice way to end it, to be honest. You're here.
So.
Yeah, we're here.
We're here.
That's it.
And we're just navigating, yeah.
Opportunity.
No,
This is great.
thanks for coming. It actually flew by. We're over 2 hours now. And so I there's so many more. I could talk to you about so many other different things too, and we could definitely keep this
Psychedelics
going.
next time. I have
Yeah, we could
so much to talk about.
Part two.
Yeah.
So part two. There's your part two right
we'll
there.
definitely do a part two because
That one's a fun one.
I do want to address that. Yeah,
Right,
shoot. Yeah, we'll definitely schedule something again.
Ego dissolution, all of it. I'm here to talk about all of it.
All right.
Go.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for coming by.
Yeah, it's
And
great.
It was great speaking with you and nice meeting you as well. So,
Yeah, I appreciate the time.
all right, we're done. Peace.